Our goal on this trip is to cross Mexico from the Atlantic coast to the Pacific coast without using motorized transport. Starting in Alvarado, we'll bike some 156 kilometers along this road through Tlacotalpan and Tuxtepec to Cerro de Oro. Then I will kayak some 30 kilometers from Cerro de Oro across this lake and up the Osila River to Piedras de Azúcar. From here, we will walk into the Sierra Norte of Oaxaca. This walk should take some 6 days and will transport us back centuries through some of the most primitive parts of Mexico. I will then ride a road bike into Oaxaca and a mountain bike down jungle paths to the Pacific and Puerto Escondido. The expedition starts in Alvarado. Here in 1518, almost 500 years ago, and the year before Cortez set foot in Mexico, Alvarado sailed up the Papua-Lapan River. He was met by emissaries of Moctezuma who called him Tonatiuh, the Sun, because of his impressive height and red hair. Alvarado is now a quaint fishing town. Many of the people of this town, and indeed of the whole Veracruz coast, have a strong African strain. When the Spaniards came here, they brought with them men of mixed African-Spanish blood who had lived together in Cuba and other Caribbean islands. They also brought pigs and horses and other domestic creatures unknown to the New World. These animals carried diseases and parasites to which the indigenous people had no immunity, causing the death of a huge percentage of the indigenous Indian population. Most of those who survived had intermarried with the Spanish or Afro-Spanish invaders. By 1808, in this area of Mexico, one source claims there were 1,600 families of mixed Afro-Mexican blood, and only 1,150 families of pure indigenous blood. On our first evening, we had dinner at Sotavento, where our host, Luis, whom we call El Negro, entertained us with jarocha ballads, whose instruments and musical roots dated back to his African ancestors. The road from Alvarado to Tuxtepec and on to Cerro de Oro is pretty much flat, but it's great for road biking. We stopped for the night in Tlacotalpan, where Alvarado met with Moctezuma's men and enjoyed this picturesque town. Built in 1988, this dam displaced some 26,000 people. Villages, churches, old trails, and routes of passage were submerged under its waters, and the Chinantla people who live in the Sierra to the west of the lake became even more cut off from the Spanish-speaking Mexico of the Eastern Plains.
So the first step, the first phase, 98 miles on a bicycle, is completed. The next phase is 20 kilometers across this lake, and then up a river about another 5 or 7 kilometers. Nobody knows the distances. They don't have much idea of the time, and there's no map. So the big challenge really is not to get lost.
It took me some 6 hours to cross this lake and paddle up the river to Piedras de Azúcar. But as so often, the beauty of the area is etched deep in my memory because of the slow and deliberate passage across its rippling surface, paddle stroke by paddle stroke. Pelicans, cormorants, ospreys, herons, and eagles kept me company. In the afternoon, the winds rose as a storm blew in from the northeast, causing waves and surf that pushed me onwards. Our friends, Aaron, his wife Margot, both writers, Angelica, and our wonderful guide, Pedro Osorio, joined me the following day by motorboat. From here, on the banks of the Usila River, we were leaving civilization behind and entering the Sierra, territory of the Chinantla.
So this is Aaron. Margot was over there, she abandoned us, but this is Aaron. And here we are now really starting to hike up into the woods. For now it's all senderos. It's now digital senderos. Paths. Small paths in the wilderness. Crooked trails. And crooked trails and bestias.
For the next 6 days we walked back in time, back to an era before the wheel was invented. On the first day of our journey, we hiked some 5 hours to San Pedro Tlatepusco, a community of 155 persons that can only be reached by this path and another path to the west. Every person or thing entering San Pedro must walk this path, man and beast, but not a motor or a bicycle. On our way, we crossed dry stream beds several times on bridges that have been built in the last 20 years. But these do not permit bestias. So in periods of rain, when the streams are flooded, only man, not his beasts of burden, can cross in here. And since it rains some 65 inches and 130 days a year, San Pedro remains remote. After San Pedro, we walked some 7 hours from one watershed, the Papualapan, to another, the Perfumado, crossing a ridge of hills, rising and then falling some 4,000 feet up and down again, until we reached San Antonio del Barrio. We walked on paths that have been used by the Chinantecos for well over 1,000 years, predating the era of the Aztec Empire. Along the way, we encountered a wide range of beautiful birds, butterflies, trees and flowers. We tracked the footsteps of what Pedro Osorio simply called un felino, not certain whether it was a jaguar, a puma, or an ocelot. All of them still prowl these jungles. We found seeds stripped of their skin and pulp by the tepiscuincle, a fruit-eating mammal the size of a house cat and the shape of a tapir. We swam in the icy waters where the Perfumado and the Tlacuache rivers converged. We were shown ancient Chinanteco tombs, discovered only this century, and we saw the beautiful bowls and artifacts that were stored in there with their deceased owners. But we came for more than a glimpse into a remote place, or even for the sensation of being transported back to an era before the industrial age. We wanted to understand how this world, these peoples, are being impacted by the modern world. Part of that impact is evident and tangible. They have electricity. They laboriously carry in concrete and build solid, stable, clean homes. The young people no longer wear the traditional dress, although occasionally we encounter some older women wearing huipiles. And most people under 40 speak Spanish. But everyone still speaks Chinanteco as their first language. Another part, though, is not so tangible. How do they feel about the advance of civilization? Since 2003, Santa Cruz has been connected to the highway and the world by a road. The road opened up the possibility of commerce. There were people who wanted to harvest the timber of the forest. According to Pedro, this caused enormous friction in the community. But after much debate, the community rejected all offers. The logic, said Pedro, was, if we take this money, we'll spend it on things we have never needed, TVs, motorcycles, more clothes, and it will soon be gone. But so will our forest. Then we won't have the trees to protect our water source, or the erosion of our land, and we will have to leave here. We will not be able to give to our children the beauty and the peace and the life that our fathers and grandfathers and ancestors enjoyed for centuries. Today, the community is 100% committed to preserving their forests, their water, their wildlife. Some think that they can turn this to an economic advantage through tourism. Others are skeptical, but they don't care. They prefer to live as they are. Of course, this begs 100 questions. Will their children feel the same way? Or are they depriving their children of a better life? From what we saw, every man, woman, and even children was in the fields working most of the day, planting, clearing, carrying, all heavy work. It would be foolish to suggest they live in some kind of sustainable agrarian utopia. They don't. and the population of most of the villages we passed through was about half what it had been 15 years ago. Yes, we went back in time to a peaceful world, but one, I fear, that will not be here for long. Leaving the
Okay.
Chinantla, we spent the night in a trucker stop at the high point of the road from Oaxaca to Tuxtepec, some 10,000 feet above sea level. From here we could look back over the land we had crossed on foot, and from here we set off the next day on road bikes to Oaxaca. Oaxaca is a jewel, definitely the most beautiful state capital in Mexico, teeming with artists and rich in culture, both ancient and modern. Here we spent 2 days reconnecting with civilization, for better or worse. The last leg involved 3 hard days riding up and down forest paths and loggers' trails through the wooded Sierra that separates Oaxaca from the sea. Leaving before sunrise to beat the heat of the day, we rode some 6 or 7 hours a day, napping from noon to 4. We passed through quaint villages, alongside charming streams, and across ridges with views that unfolded like tapestries as we rode. But by the afternoon of the 3rd day, I was dog-tired and could not wait to dive into the Pacific Ocean. So why? Why attempt to cross from the Atlantic to the Pacific without motor? Well, in part it's the challenge, the adventure. In part it's because in solitude we get to know ourselves. And in part it is the beauty of being in remote places surrounded by the beauty of nature. We're destroying nature at an unprecedented rate, and I believe, like Schumacher, that when man finally wins his war against nature, he will realize he was on the losing side. We must stop building sprawling cities, living in enormous houses, and using fossil fuels at a pace that is not only sustainable, but is causing dramatic changes to our planet. Travel without motor is one way to express this commitment. And I made this video because if you share these values, adventure, challenge, the preservation of nature, and the need to know ourselves, I believe you will enjoy my book, Listening to Butterflies, which you can find on Amazon. It is about growing up in Africa, about the end of a colonial era, and about rediscovering, in my 60s, the pleasure and tranquility that I knew as a child, rediscovering it through nature and through expeditions like this. Go buy it, Listening to Butterflies.